Hey everyone, let me introduce you to RuneQuilt, the first grid-based word processor. It's a simple idea, but I think it represents a paradigm shift in how we can do world building. What inspired me to create this software is that every time I try to write a story, I inevitably take long breaks from it, and when I come back to it, I've usually forgotten a lot of details that I came up with. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just associate a bunch of metadata with each piece of text? Kind of like an Excel sheet, but with a full text editor built in. That's exactly what RuneQuilt is. What I want to do now is dive into all the features of the software. The first thing we'll look at is the rows and columns. I'll start by demonstrating how we can add rows and columns. We have this plus row button and this plus column button up here. So if I click the plus row button, we get a new row along the bottom. And if we click the plus column button, we get another column over to the side. We can resize this so we can see our new column. We can rename the column and just call it something like day of week. We can also add columns by right clicking and saying insert column left or insert column right. So we can create a new column that way. And similarly, we can also create new rows by coming over here and saying insert row above or below. So we can say insert row above and make a new row above. And we can also move rows and columns around. So I can click these buttons. We can just say this is a new row. This around, and we can do the same thing with columns. We can say move right and move the columns around, and we can also delete columns and rows. So I can click this delete button and we get this dialog box here that lets us delete the column, and then I can also delete a row. And because rows will necessarily contain story content from this first story column, when you try to delete a row, it's going to prompt you to do a snapshot. So we'll go ahead and capture a snapshot, and that's a feature we'll talk about a little bit later. And we can see that the row was deleted. I went ahead and restored the story back to its original state. And now what I want to demonstrate is the filtering. So the filters work on every different kind of column. This first column here is our story column. And I can say prologue. And it'll find the cell that contains a row that has a word prologue in there. I can clear the filter. I can find all the scenes where Kaylin is the point of view, so I can type Kaylin, and we can rapidly see all the scenes, or I guess in this case all the chapters where Kaylin is the primary point of view. And I can also come up here and click clear filters to clear all the filters. So we can have multiple filters. We can say Kaylin, and then we can say draft, and it'll show us all the scenes where Kaylin is the primary point of view and the scene itself is still in the draft state. Now let's talk about the actual text editor. So as you can see, this first column is a special column, and it does have a full WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get editor associated with it. So what that means is I can come in here and I can create, for example, a bullet point list, just like you would expect any normal text editor to do. I can make a numbered list. I can make a checklist. I can put quotations in here. I can put a code block in here. This is indented text. I can indent the text. or unindent it. So as you can see, we do have all the typical features that you would expect from a text editor. And that's one of the nice things that makes this software stand out from something like Excel, where you don't really get the full text editing capability anywhere in Excel. You're able to do some basic bolding and italicizing of text in Excel, but it doesn't really have the full featured suite of text editing built into Excel. So now let's go over some of the features of the software. And before I get into that, the software is currently in beta, so I've done some testing but not extensive testing of all the features. So it's possible you may see some anomalous behavior as I walk through the different features. Let's begin with the file menu. Let's come up here and say open story, and we can open one of these demo stories that I put together. Click open and it does open the story. We can come up here and we can close the story. Let's come up here and open the first story that we had open. We can save as and give it a different name. We can also import a Word document. And the way that this works is it can parse the Word document by headings, or you can specify a custom delimiter within the Word document. Let's go ahead and try split by word headings and do import. And we can see that we have a story here. And the original Word document had headings, and it just finds those headings and then it splits it out that way. We can do export. We can do export to Word document. And it'll export it. Here's our exported document, so we can go ahead and open that. And we can see that the document was successfully exported. We can also export to Markdown, and then we can close the software. Now let's look at some of the options under the View menu. We've got Clear All Filters, which we talked about before. There's also the Clear All Filters button up here. And then we have Toggle Focus Mode, so that takes away all the columns and you just see the primary column with the story in it. And we can turn that off. We can click this button here to go back to that original view. And then we have our writing analytics. So we get this nice little chart showing how many words we wrote on different days. And we get this Flash Kincaid grading here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So let's talk about writing sessions. Right now we are at the beginning of a writing session. A new writing session starts anytime we load up the software. And we can just write a couple of words in here, so we can see this is a new paragraph with some words. And we can see that we just wrote 8 words for the current session. Our total number of words for the day is 8. And our number of words for our manuscript increased by 8. You can see this number go up a little bit more if we just write a few words. This is a few more words for the day. So it does keep a word count here, and then we can also configure the total number of words that we want to write for the manuscript, and we see a percentage complete here for each one of these metrics. So let's go ahead and click the new session button. What that'll do is it'll reset the current session. You can see that it returned back to 0 words, but we've still written 17 words today. And then we can come back to our analytics view, and we see that we have a new session for the day. and it shows that we've written 17 words. And again, this bar graph just shows total number of words written per day instead of for individual sessions. So we could write a few more words. Let's write a few more words today so we get closer to our daily goal. So now we've written 32 words today. Let's go ahead and capture a snapshot, and then let's look at our analytics, and we can see that we've written 32 words today. The next thing I want to demonstrate is that because of the way that the software was engineered, it remains pretty performant even when you have hundreds of thousands of words in your manuscript. So let me demonstrate that. I'm going to come over to File, Import, Word Document. I have this document called Massive Stress Test. It's got, I think, like 600,000 words in it. So we're going to open that. We're going to import by headings. It's going to grind through it for a couple of seconds. So we can see it's got 621,000 words, and a typical novel is only about 100,000 words. And we can scroll through this thing and you can see it doesn't really lag, it's not slowing down, it doesn't really bog the software down because we imported a manuscript with that many words. It's just lorem ipsum over and over. We can scroll through this thing and it's pretty performant, so you wouldn't have to worry about having thousands of rows and having a lot of words in your manuscript. Just kind of feel free to write as much as you want and the software will still be pretty performant. Now let's take a quick look at the insert menu. We've got image, so we can insert images. We can insert custom column types, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And then we do have add row and add column, which serves the same function as these buttons right here. So true to the fact that I want the first column here to be a true fully featured WYSIWYG editor, you can insert images. So let's go to image, let's click this wave image here, click open, and as you can see we can import images, we can resize them and drag this around so it behaves just like you would expect a typical image to behave. Next, I want to demonstrate one of my favorite features in this software. We come over to Tools, Manage Column Templates, and we can see that we can define specific column types here. What you saw over in the main window, these drop-down options are defined based on these column types. So we can see that we have POV character, these are defined in this window. Status, we have draft, editing, final, brainstorming. You can see these options here. Tension level, low, medium, high, critical, climax. You can really use these custom column types for just about anything. So let's try adding a new one. Let's call it plot. And then we'll just call this touch point. And we'll just add another option. So I'm going to say tab. Just call this null just so we have two options here. We click the apply button and then close. And then let's say that I want to, let's go to insert column type, plot. And then we have our plot column, so let's move this over to the left so we can see it a little bit easier. And let's say that we want to call this one Lyra's backstory. And then we want another one, so we're going to go to insert column template, plot. And we're going to move this one over to the left as well. And we're going to call this one Kaylin's search for Ethelgard. And And we're gonna say here that this is a touch point for Lyra's backstory, and then this is a touch point for Kaylin's search for Ethelgard. And let's say later on we want to quickly find all the places where our narrative touches these different plot or lines of plot. You can just search for touch point and quickly find out, oh, where exactly does our story touch this plot? And then where exactly does our story touch this plot point here? And it'll quickly give us all the sections of text that have touched that particular plot. So you could use this to track multiple parallel plots in your story, or you could use it to track just about anything in your story. Alright, let's continue looking at the other options under the Tools menu. So go to Tools, Analyze Text, Track Word Frequency. Let's say we want to see how many times we use the word the in each row, so we click on Create Tracker. And it just does a simple word count. So we use the word the 10 times in this section of text, 7 times here, 6 times here, and so on. So these don't update live. Let's say you added the word the in there a couple more times. It's not going to update here, but what you could do is just go in here again, click Track Word Frequency, type the, and you'll get an updated column here, and you can just delete the old one. And you can also come in here and do a readability score. So what that does is it performs a Flash-Kincaid calculation on your text, just to kind of give you a sort of grading of how sophisticated your writing is. It's a really simple formula. Just depends on if you find that useful or not. Alright, let's keep going. So next we have the lore book, which is also accessible by clicking this lore book button over here. And what this does is, kind of as the name suggests, it lets us define categories of anything, and then items within each category, and then individual fields within each of those items. So for example, we have locations. We could easily add another location. Let's call this Emerald City. And then we could just say color. Of course, the color is emerald. Click apply changes. We have magical artifacts, factions, different characters, and we can add fields here. So we could say Kaylin Vane's favorite color is blue. We can delete fields as well. Same thing here. If you want to delete an item, you can just click the X button here, and same thing over here. So I think this is really nice for keeping track of, like I said, locations, factions, characters, anything else you want to keep track of. And there's another really nice, pretty powerful feature in here. So if you come over to your actual narrative and you enter this special syntax here, so it's ampersand, $, and then colon, and it'll bring up this nice IntelliSense here. And you can populate it with whatever you've defined over here. So let's say we want to know the color of Emerald City, so we can just type locations, the Emerald City, just hit tab to complete it. And what that does, I'm going to go ahead and just close this. There's also a computed view. So if I click on computed view, you can see that it replaces our special syntax with the actual value that's underlying that value. So it replaces that syntax with emerald. We can come back to our normal view. And also when you do an export to Markdown or Word document, you'll get the actual computed value. You won't get this special syntax. So you don't have to go back in there and make those changes. And I think this could be pretty powerful. Let's say that there's some, this is kind of a silly example, but let's say that
you have a character and their favorite color is central to the plot. Let's say that you decide that their favorite color should change from red to blue. All you would do is just change it in the lore book. You would just change the value here. So favorite color, blue. And let's say you've got thousands of references to that color in your text, and then later on you say you want it to be green, you would just change it here. So it's pretty powerful because it makes it so that you only need to change that value a single time instead of changing it many times in your text. Now let's look at the next feature. I'm going to close this. Let's come over to Time Machine, and there are different snapshots here. Different points in time when we save the story. We can also create another one. So we can click on Restore Point, which creates a restore point, or we can go to Tools and create Restore Point. And just call this Manual Restore Point. Give it today's date. And then the timestamp. And then we can come over to Time Machine and restore that state. So it'll discard whatever changes you haven't saved, and it'll overwrite it with whatever the state was when you created that snapshot. Now let's look at the different options we have here. So let's go to Tools, Options. Let's expand this a little bit. So this toolbar here is configurable. Let's say that there's certain things that you don't care about, like underlining or inline code or whatever the case is. Let's say you just care about bold. You can simplify down the toolbar however you want, or you can turn all the options on if you want. It's up to you. Come over to display settings, and if we uncheck this, we can see that each of these cells in the first column gets its own WYSIWYG editor, or we can click on use single global toolbar and it pops back up over here. Just depends on what's more convenient for you. There is a dark mode, and then there's tracking and backups. So here you set your manuscript goal. Let's say we want to increase this to 200,000 words, and then we want the daily goal to be 2,500. You can see that those update here at the bottom status bar. And the software does perform auto snapshots every 30 minutes, which is configurable here, and it'll save up to 10 snapshots. Now the last feature that I want to look at is swapping cells. So you can right click a cell, mark for swap, and then right click a destination cell and click swap with marked cell. Let's go ahead and swap these back to their original location. And the software is pretty intelligent in terms of understanding what kind of cell has been marked. So let's say that you mark a story cell, so the story column, these are special cells, and if you right click over here, it won't let you swap it because that wouldn't make sense, and you also can't swap it with a regular metadata cell. You can always just cancel swap, and then let's say you want to swap a character with another character, you could do that, but you can't swap different types with each other because that also doesn't make sense. So you come over here and you're not able to do that swap. You can do a cancel, and let's say here, mark for swap. I want to swap it with attention level. That also doesn't make sense, but you can swap it with another status, so you could do that. And these are just basic metadata cells, so you can swap these around. This is just text, so you could swap this over here, even though semantically it doesn't make sense. But again, these are just simple metadata cells, and then you can mark this for swap and swap this over here. And the last thing I want to talk about is the documentation. So let's come over here, and the features are pretty well or at least somewhat well documented. And if you have any issues with the software, you can always email me or scrub through this video and go back and see how the different features work. In the future, if there's a lot of interest in this software, I plan to create the ability to download updates to the software. And then here's a nice little about page that shows that the software is in beta. You can see my name here. I am the author of the software. Nice little logo. And that's it. That's RuneQuilt.
I built RuneQuilt because I needed a better way to handle my own world building and complex writing projects. It's currently in beta, available for a one-time $20 fee. This is my way of testing the waters to see if other writers are trying to solve the same problem. Because if this software saves you time, I think it's worth every penny. If you're dealing with the same friction in your writing process, you can grab the beta at runequilt.com.